Welcome back to Essential Dialogues. Today, we're going deep into Ethiopian real estate. We've got a really fascinating mix of sources, actually. Company websites, news articles. We even pulled some in-depth market analysis.
That's right. So think of this as, your shortcut to understanding this complex market. We're going to hit the hottest trends, the legal side of things, the regulations, and of course, the big question, what's the future hold for investors looking at Ethiopia?
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second and get the big picture first.
Yeah.
One thing that really jumps out from all this material is just how many people are moving to cities in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
The World Bank projects 30% of the population will be city dwellers by 2030.
Wow.
That's a huge change.
It is, and it's really driving this real estate boom we're seeing. I mean, for the past decade, the market's been growing an average of 14% a year.
Seriously.
Yeah, to put that in perspective, it's one of the fastest growing real estate markets in all of Africa. It's even outpacing some, well-established economies.
14% growth. No wonder everyone's talking about Ethiopia. But, looking through these sources, there's also this recent credit cap from the National Bank of Ethiopia.
Yeah, the NBE.
How's that impacting things?
Well, it's a big development. I mean, the NBE's move to limit lending, it's already having a ripple effect. We're seeing developers in Addis Ababa especially, they're adjusting prices. Buyers are having to figure things out with less purchasing power.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fewer loans available.
Exactly.
It's like a sudden chill in the market.
Yeah.
But then you have these huge development projects being announced, like African Heights.
Right.
It's going for this, mid-luxury apartment feel, trying to attract, local and international buyers.
And it's a good example of how developers are adapting, I think. African Heights is emphasizing amenities, security, modern design, all the things that appeal to a segment that's, maybe less impacted by the credit crunch.
Right, right. And it's not just these smaller developments either. We see Ovid Construction is launching a 60,000-unit project.
Right.
Wow. And Gift Real Estate, they're planning another one, 4,000 units.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them are partnering with the Addis Ababa City Administration. I mean, those numbers are just massive.
Yeah, they're huge. And what's interesting is this trend toward, public-private partnerships. It's a way to tackle that housing deficit, right? On the one hand, it's how we get more units built fast. But the challenge then becomes, how do we control the quality and make sure it's affordable, for everyday Ethiopians? These big projects, they might not be the answer for everyone.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It seems like the market's trying to cater to everyone, though.
Yeah.
From, folks seeking luxury to those who need something a little more affordable. We even have developers like Eagle Hills focusing on these integrated lifestyle communities.
Yeah, Eagle Hills is a perfect example of how things are diversifying. They're building these large-scale gated communities. You've got residential, commercial, leisure spaces all combined. It's very different from, say, like a high-rise in the city center.
So a lot of options for investors to consider. But I imagine there's some challenges too, right? I mean, our sources talk about the high cost of land, construction materials, things like that. Big hurdles.
They are. I mean, land prices in Ethiopia, some of the highest in Africa, comparable to certain European capitals even. It creates a high barrier to entry for a lot of folks. And then you have the issue of financing. Limited access to financing, especially mortgages. The market for those is still underdeveloped. And interest rates are, they're pretty high.
It sounds like you need capital to even get into the market. But then getting that capital is, it's really tough.
Exactly. And then there's the regulatory and institutional barriers. I mean, take Ethiopia's land tenure system. It's based on state ownership and leasehold. It can be a lot to figure out for investors who are unfamiliar with it.
So definitely a steep learning curve for anyone new to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
But it seems like the government is trying to simplify things, right? I mean, our sources mentioned some new initiatives to, stimulate the market and add some regulations.
They are. One big change is this draft real estate development and real property marketing and valuation proclamation. It's really focused on making things more transparent and protecting everyone involved.
Sounds like a step in the right direction.
It is. And the government's also considering allowing foreigners to own property. That could really open up the market and bring in a lot of international money.
That would be huge. But for now, it seems like most investment is coming from within Ethiopia. Like Ethiopian Airlines, they just bought 5,000 houses from Ovid Real Estate for their employees.
Right, it's a good example. Shows the potential even within Ethiopia itself. But, and this is important, Anyone looking at this market, they need to stay updated on the regulations. Things are changing fast.
And speaking of things moving quickly, let's talk mortgages. A lot of our listeners are probably wondering about this. Our sources, I mean, they all point to how hard it is to get a mortgage right now. Limited options, high rates. Is there any hope for improvement?
It's definitely frustrating for people, but there are some glimmers of hope. One to watch is this company, Ovid Batak. They're offering mortgages and trying to come up with some new solutions. Their entry into the market could bring more competition, which could mean better terms for borrowers.
Okay, that's good to hear. But like you said, it's early days.
Yeah.
Any other developments that could shake things up on the financing side?
The Ethiopian Securities Exchange, the ESX, that could be a real game changer down the line. It could give developers new ways to raise capital. They wouldn't have to rely so much on traditional bank loans, which are, well, we've talked about that. They're limited right now.
So a more diverse, dynamic financial scene for real estate, that could be a big deal.
Yeah, it could. But we have to remember the ESX is still pretty new. It's going to take some time for it to mature and for people to get comfortable with, new financial tools.
Patience, huh? Seems to be the key word when it comes to Ethiopian real estate.
Mm.
Huge potential, but a lot of moving pieces.
Mm-hmm.
What about the future? What's your outlook? Where's this market headed?
Cautiously optimistic, I'd say. You have strong economic reforms, infrastructure development. You have a young population that's becoming more and more urban. Those are the fundamentals, and they're strong. That points to strong demand for real estate for a long time.
Okay, so that's good news for those who are already invested or thinking about it.
Right.
But, I mean, what about all the challenges we've talked about?
Those are still important. Regulations are changing, the cost of land and construction is high, and a lot of people just can't get financing. But there are some pretty cool things on the horizon. Think about technology. I mean, that has the potential to make this whole market more efficient and transparent.
Yeah, technology is a game changer. And it feels like there's more talk about sustainability and development, globally and in Ethiopia.
Absolutely. We're seeing developers doing things like adding solar panels, using rainwater, even building with these traditional materials like bamboo and earth. They're more sustainable than concrete and steel.
That's actually really interesting. Traditional knowledge meets modern technology. It's like innovative solutions from both ends.
Exactly. And I think we'll see even more of that in the future, blending the old and the new.
So it's not just about bricks and mortar anymore. There's this whole digital side to it.
Right. And for investors and developers, getting on board with this new tech, well, that's how you stay ahead.
Okay. So we've covered the big picture, the opportunities, the challenges. But let's be real for a second. What are some red flags for investors? What are some things to watch out for? Some potential pitfalls?
Well, the biggest risk, I'd say, is just the uncertainty around regulations. I mean, the government's making changes, which is good long term, but in the short term, it can be unpredictable for investors. They're having to keep adapting to these new rules.
So keeping up with the changes is key.
It really is. Another risk is just, well, the ups and downs of the economy. Ethiopia is growing like crazy, but things outside the country, like global prices or even instability in the region, those can have an impact.
And we can't forget about inflation and currency fluctuations.
Right. Those can really hurt your returns.
Yeah.
Another thing is, well, frankly, transparency can be a problem sometimes. It's hard to get good info about property values, who owned it before, even past transactions. That adds a lot of risk for investors.
So due diligence is essential. Finding trustworthy partners, I mean, that's crucial.
Absolutely. And this happens in any emerging market, but there's always the risk of fraud, people trying to take advantage of investors who don't know any better.
So be careful, verify everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
trust but verify.
Exactly. Investing in Ethiopia can pay off big time, but it's not without risks. Understanding those risks and knowing how to manage them, that's how you make smart decisions.
Great advice. We've covered so much today, from the big trends to the small details.
Yeah, it's a complex market, but a lot of potential.
Stay with us for part 2, where we're going to really dive into those nuances of Ethiopian real estate.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, being informed and adaptable, that's how you win in any emerging market, especially one as dynamic as Ethiopia.
Speaking of being informed, let's unpack this land tenure system a bit more. You mentioned it's tricky, especially for people who aren't familiar with it. What are some key things investors need to know?
Well, the thing is, in Ethiopia, all land is technically owned by the state.
Okay.
So Individuals or companies, they can get rights to use the land, but they don't actually own it outright. It's usually done through these long-term leases.
So like similar to a leasehold system you see in other countries.
Exactly. Now, this system works for a lot of people, but it can be, well, it can be a lot to wrap your head around if you're a new investor. One thing is the process of getting a lease and renewing it, it can be, it can be pretty bureaucratic.
Ah, I see.
And then there's the question of, like, how secure is that lease?
So it's not as simple as just buying property and owning it outright.
Right, exactly. That's why it's so important to really understand, like, all the terms and conditions of the lease before you invest anything. Working with local legal experts, people who know the system inside and out, I mean, that's essential.
It sounds like having the right team, the right people on your side, that's a must in this market.
It's huge. But the good news is the government's working on reforms to make land administration, more transparent, more efficient. Investors need to stay on top of this, see how things evolve.
Speaking of things to watch, we talked about the ESX earlier, the Ethiopian Securities Exchange. Remind us how that could impact real estate.
Yeah, so the ESX is still new, but it has the potential to, well, to really change how real estate projects get financed in Ethiopia. Right now, most developers rely heavily on bank loans, which, as we've said, are limited by the credit cap.
Right, it ties their hands a bit.
Exactly. The ESX could be a platform for companies to raise capital by issuing bonds or even shares. For the real estate sector, this could mean the introduction of something called REITs.
Okay, for those of us who don't speak Wall Street, what's a REIT? Like, explain it like I'm five.
Sure. A REIT, or Real Estate Investment Trust. It's basically a company that owns, operates, or finances income-producing real estate. Think of it like a mutual fund for real estate. It lets investors pool their money and invest in, these big projects they couldn't afford on their own.
So instead of buying a single property, you're buying shares of a company that owns, like, a bunch of properties.
Exactly. And those properties, they make money through rent or lease payments, and that money is then distributed to the REIT shareholders as dividends.
So it could be a way for people to get into the Ethiopian market without, the headaches of owning property directly.
Yeah, exactly. It also gives developers, another way to get financing besides bank loans, which is really important right now with those credit restrictions. But, and this is important, developing a REIT market, that takes time. The ESX is new, and all the rules and regulations for REITs, those are still being worked out.
So it's something to watch, but not a solution for right now.
Well,
While we're on challenges, our sources also mention some economic risks in Ethiopia, things like inflation and currency fluctuations.
yeah, those are issues everywhere, but they're especially important in emerging markets. Inflation, for example, it's eating away at people's purchasing power everywhere. It makes it hard for developers to, figure out how much things will cost and for buyers to actually afford properties.
And the Ethiopian birr, how do currency changes affect things?
Well, birr's been pretty volatile lately. That makes investors nervous, especially foreign investors. They don't know what their return will be when they convert it back to, their own currency.
Well, you have to think globally even when you're investing locally.
Exactly. You got to factor these risks into your decisions. It's all part of doing your homework, your due diligence.
Speaking of due diligence, we've talked about working with local partners a few times. Why is that so important in Ethiopia?
A few reasons. First, local partners have, well, they just have this on-the-ground expertise. They understand the market, the culture, all the rules and regulations in a way that outsiders just don't.
So they can help you, navigate the system and avoid those hidden traps.
Exactly. They can also help you find the right opportunities. They often have access to off-market deals or know reliable developers and contractors.
It's all about who you know, those connections.
It really is. And trust is huge in any business deal, but especially in a place like Ethiopia where personal relationships are so important.
Makes sense. It's not just about the numbers. It's about those human connections.
Exactly. And for someone new to the market, finding a trustworthy local partner, I mean, that can make all the difference. It can mean the difference between, a great investment and a big mistake.
So for our listeners out there thinking about real estate in Ethiopia, what's your top 3 pieces of advice?
Number 1, do your research. Don't just jump in. Understand the market, the regulations, the risks. Number 2, find a good local partner, someone you trust, someone who knows the ropes. And number 3, be patient. Real estate is a long game. It's not a way to get rich quick.
Solid advice. Be informed. Be strategic. Play the long game.
Exactly. And for those willing to put in the work, the rewards can be big. Ethiopia has huge potential, and real estate is a major part of that.
We've talked a lot about the big picture, but what about some specific projects that are happening right now? We mentioned African Heights and Eagle Hills, but what else is out there? What should we be watching?
One that's really interesting is this huge 60,000 unit project by Ovid Construction. I mean, the scale is just massive, and it shows how confident developers are about Ethiopia's future.
Wow, 60,000 units, that's a whole city. What's the idea behind something that big?
It's being developed with the Addis Ababa City Administration, which shows this trend we've been talking about, public-private partnerships to address the housing shortage. Building that many units, that should have a big impact on supply and hopefully make housing more affordable for more people.
That sounds like a good step towards, making housing more affordable, like we discussed before.
It could be, but we have to see what the quality is like and if people can actually afford these units.
That's a good point. It's not just about how many units you build. It's about quality and making sure people can afford them.
Exactly. And that's something to keep in mind when we're looking at these big projects. We want to build thriving communities, not just, a bunch of buildings.
Well said. Now, another big topic has been technology. How is that changing real estate in Ethiopia?
Technology is making things more efficient, more transparent, easier to access. One of the biggest changes is these online platforms for listing and marketing properties. Websites like EthiopianHome.com and these other real estate portals, they're connecting buyers and sellers directly, so you don't need those traditional middlemen as much.
So it's bringing the market online, making things smoother.
Exactly. And it's not just buying and selling. Property management is changing too. There's software now that can handle talking to tenants, collecting rent, even keeping track of repairs.
It's like automating all the boring stuff.
Yeah, it is. So property managers can focus on, the bigger picture.
Are there any other cool ways tech is being used in Ethiopian real estate?
Well, virtual reality is starting to catch on. Some companies are making virtual tours of properties, so you can walk through a space online before you even visit it in person.
That's wild. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It is, right. But this is the future. Technology is changing how we experience the world, and real estate is no exception.
So it's not just about bricks and mortar anymore. It's about this whole digital layer on top of it.
Exactly. And for investors and developers embracing this tech, that's how you stay ahead of the game.
Okay, so we've talked about opportunities, challenges, the exciting potential of technology, but let's get real. What are some red flags investors should watch out for in the Ethiopian market? What are some potential pitfalls?
Well, one of the biggest risks is just the uncertainty around regulations. The government's making changes, which is good in the long run, but right now it can be unpredictable for investors. They have to keep adapting to these new rules.
So staying informed about the changes is crucial.
It is. Another risk is economic volatility. Ethiopia has been growing like crazy, but things outside the country, like global prices or instability in the region, those things can have an impact.
And we can't forget about inflation and those currency fluctuations.
Right. Those can eat into your profits. Another thing is transparency. It can be a problem in some parts of the market. Getting good info on property values, ownership history, even past transactions, it can be really tough. That makes things riskier for investors.
So due diligence is key. Finding partners you can trust, that's crucial.
You're absolutely right. And, it's like any emerging market, there's always the risk of fraud. People looking to take advantage of investors who don't know the ropes.
That's why it's so important to be careful and verify everything. Trust, but verify, as they say.
Exactly. Investing in Ethiopia can be very rewarding, but it's not without its risks. Understanding and mitigating those risks, that's key to making smart investment decisions.
That's some great advice. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the macro trends to the nitty-gritty details.
We have. It's a complex market, but it also has a lot of potential.
Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore what the future holds for the Ethiopian real estate market and what it all means for you. Welcome back. It's the final part of our deep dive into Ethiopian real estate. We've talked trends, investment opportunities, the challenges, the risks. It's been a lot.
It has. We've really gone deep on this, complex and ever-changing market.
We have. And now I'm really curious about something we haven't touched on much. Sustainability. Are developers, investors, are they paying attention to that in Ethiopia?
It's definitely becoming more important, but, there's still a lot of room for improvement. Globally, people are more aware of how construction affects the environment, and that's influencing things in Ethiopia, too.
So what are some of the key things we talk about when we say sustainability in real estate?
Well, A lot of things, but the big ones are energy efficiency, saving water,
Wow.
using sustainable building materials. It's all about designing and building in a way that, has the smallest impact on the environment.
So it's not just about making pretty buildings. It's about, well, making buildings that work with their surroundings.
Exactly. And it's good for the people who live and work in those buildings too. Sustainable buildings are often healthier, more comfortable. It's a win-win.
Are there any, examples of sustainable practices happening in Ethiopia right now? Things that, make you hopeful for the future?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Some developers are adding solar panels, rainwater harvesting systems to their projects, and there's more interest in using traditional materials, things like bamboo and earth. Those are a lot more sustainable than concrete and steel.
It's cool to see how traditional building and modern technology can, come together to solve problems.
It is. I think we'll see a lot more of that, blending the old and the new.
Now let's think about the buyer for a second. Someone who wants to purchase property in Ethiopia. What advice would you give them? What are the big things to keep in mind?
Location, location, location. Just like anywhere else. Properties in good neighborhoods, close to things people need, good transportation, those tend to hold their value.
So do your research. Understand the area before you commit.
Exactly. Also, think about what type of property you want and what you can afford. House, townhouse, apartment, new construction, or something older. Those all matter.
And we can't forget financing. That's been a challenge for a lot of people in Ethiopia.
Yeah, the mortgage market's not great. Interest rates are high. So if you're getting a mortgage, shop around, compare rates. Don't just take the first offer.
And think about all those extra costs, too, like property taxes, maintenance, insurance.
Right, those add up fast. You need a clear picture of all the costs involved before you jump in.
So buying property in Ethiopia, it's a big decision. You got to plan carefully.
It is. I always recommend talking to professionals, a real estate agent, a lawyer, before you sign anything big.
Solid advice. Okay, we've talked about so much. It's clear that things are constantly changing in Ethiopian real estate. Are there any, resources people can use to stay up to date?
Yeah, there are some really good websites with news and analysis about the sector. Ethiopian Business Review, New Business Ethiopia, Ethiopian Monitor. Those are good places to start. And of course, real estate websites like ethiopianhome.com and Addis Ababa Real Estate. Those are helpful for checking listings and prices.
So if you're willing to put in the time, there's a lot of information out there.
There is. And going to industry events and conferences, that's a great way to learn and meet people.
Okay, so we're wrapping up our deep dive. Give me your, big picture prediction. What's the future of Ethiopian real estate? Where do you see things in, say, 5 to 10 years?
I'm optimistic. Ethiopia has some really strong points going for it. Strong economic growth, fast-growing cities, a young and expanding population. Those things suggest the demand for housing and commercial real estate will stay strong.
That's good to hear. But we can't forget those challenges that we discussed.
Of course not. Regulations are still changing. It's hard to get financing, and there are risks with the economy and currency.
So you have to balance it all. Weigh the potential rewards against the risks.
Right. But I think the opportunities outweigh the challenges. If you're smart, do your homework, and you're patient, Ethiopian real estate can be a very rewarding investment.
That's a great point to end on. Be informed, be strategic, be patient.
Exactly. And one more thing. Be open to building relationships. Get to know the local market, find good partners, build trust. Relationships are key to success in any business, especially real estate.
That's a great insight. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the people you meet along the way.
Couldn't agree more.
This has been fascinating. We've really explored this dynamic and ever-changing market. Hopefully our listeners have a better understanding of Ethiopian real estate now.
I hope so. It's a market with a lot of potential, and I'm excited to see what happens in the years to come.
Me too. It's a journey with a lot of possibility.
It is. Thanks for being on the journey with us.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Ethiopian real estate. We hope you found it informative and engaging. And as always, stay curious, stay informed, and stay connected.
Until next time.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Essential Dialogues podcast. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that's shaping our world.